Okay, welcome back everybody from our brief break. The next presentation is the NextGen PMO, Project versus Operational Governance Mindsets by Mark Kozak-Holland. Dr. Kozak-Holland is a brilliant researcher, written multiple books on project management, business analysis related topics, using a lot of our modern BA and PM techniques, even OCM techniques, to look at historical situations to see what we can learn from them and apply in our modern world. So his presentations are always fascinating because they're peppered with stories of how things actually happened in past projects you might be familiar with. Today, he's going to be talking about a topic of recent research with him, which is looking at how business benefits tie into PMOs. And in this case, it's through changing the way you think about your metrics and your planning and your operations overall. Mark, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate that. So what I'm going to cover off today is sort of next generation PMO. The question really is what should a PMO be? Now, I'll just clear off the two icons there, the Charlie Chaplin and Robinson Crusoe. These are your memory recall triggers for the future. So when you think about this presentation, hopefully you'll remember it through those two iconic figures. I'm sure you'll probably have to Google them, but to find out the details on that. But anyway, you will know who these people are at the end of the presentation. So what I'm going to be covering off is, as Kevin said, is that projects are very much catalysts of change. They're disruptors in our organizations, and PMOs have a responsibility for projects. And part of that is the type of projects and the culture, and how we heard the presenters talk about the various aspects of how they manage the overall project management culture and the way things are done. Now, what I'm going to be talking about is that operations management has become a dominant force in organizations, to the point it's actually changed our thinking around projects itself. And this is very, very detrimental. It's taken project management off course of really where it should be. And part of this presentation is that if we want to do all the things that we talked about, that Kevin talked about, where we focus on stakeholders, we talk about outcomes-based approaches, we need to reset our thinking about the essentials of project management and start to move away from a operationally biased thinking that exudes within our culture itself. So what I'm saying is if we want to move forward, we have to take a step and take a step in a different direction, which is looking at how we actually run our projects. So the reason this is important is because PMOs are in a very unique position in organizations, because PMOs can do all these different things. They basically are the linkage between the organizational vision and strategy. They can take it all the way through operations, because projects deliver for operations. But I think most importantly, and again, I heard a lot of this in the discussion now with the PMO leaders, was that PMOs are a change agent. They're a catalyst. And the key things that I think a PMO can be doing are identifying the barriers to project success. This is one of the things that I really want to hit upon. I'm going to be talking about the funding models, because right now, when I look at organizations, the funding models are badly broken. Most of the funding is going on operational support. There's actually very little that's going into funding net new projects that are actually taking the organizations forward. And I'll be talking about some of the strategies that you can take. So we'll be going through a couple of strategies that can help reset that whole funding model for you. Also talk a little bit about the opportunity to stimulate innovation in projects, which is so important, and also other things like enforcing standards. And I think this is all part of what we see as the evolving to the next generation. So just to reiterate, as we go through this, I'm going to be challenging this task-based approach that Kevin talked about and be advocating this outcomes-based approach. The outcomes-based approach is all about the deliverables, matching them to stakeholders, and about tying those to benefits, to the benefits realization. Again, Kevin talked about that quite extensively. So let's move forward. Okay, so I'm going to now talk about project management challenges for PMOs, and I'll be referring to a few reports. I'm going to go through this section fairly quickly because all it's doing is giving us some building blocks. So let's start with this first report. This is a Gartner report from 23, and it just talks about IT spending by industry. Now, why are we focusing on IT? Well, because this is where most of the budgets are going to be coming from, and it's basically saying that right now spending by industry is between 4.9 and 8.6%. Okay, so we got an idea, and it's also refers to the types of companies. These are mid-range companies with that dollar value. This is another section of the report. This talks about where that spending is going. 25% of it to 33% is going on people and services. Okay, that's great. There's another report here from Flexera which basically reiterates that. But the important thing here is that most of the spending is going on technology. Most of it's going on hardware and software. So only about a quarter of it is going actually on people. This is the really important slide that I wanted to show you, because it introduces this whole aspect of where sources of funding come from, and it's all about OPEX and CAPEX. So if you haven't heard these terms, OPEX is operational expenditure, CAPEX is capital expenditure. And what Gartner point out in this report is that most of the funding that organizations have goes towards running an environment. So operational expenditure, and they reckon it's about 73%. I think that's a little bit low. I think it's, from my experience, what I've seen, it's probably between 75 to 80% of funding is operational expenditure. The rest is capital expenditure. So that means an organization has only got a limited amount, 25%, 20-25% on net new capital expenditure. And this is really important because this will highlight the kind of projects that you're going to be doing. This is really relevant to a PMO because this drives the way projects are done within your organization. And there's a little bit of information on this run, grow, transform. It's basically crawl, walk, and run. That's another way, or past, now, next view of the world. But if you look at it, you can see there that the run is the maintaining the current business capabilities, and this is where most of the money is going. And the projects that are being pushed out, the majority of them are probably going to be related to run, because that's where the funding is. Let's switch tack now here, and let's talk about transformation. So I'm talking about, this research is digital transformation, but we can kind of refer to transformations generally. But again, this report here provides us an insight about digital transformation. And basically it's saying that 29% of companies are saying ROI remains hard to obtain. Another 28% see it as a cost center. So right away, you can see that these metrics are showing that the actual way that we're measuring things isn't quite right. And it goes back to this whole discussion about benefits realization and focusing on the right things. Again, this other report here from Digital AI points out a similar kind of picture, but from a slightly different slant. It says that 56% are concerned about the ROI on transformation investments, and another 50% saying they're not seeing the results they're expecting. So what's going on here? Why are we not seeing positive results regarding these transformations? And I think part of this is well, we're going to get to that in a second, is going to be the way that we measure projects. Here's another report. This talks about digital transformations fizzling out. So again, transformations start, but they don't continue. There's three different metrics there. Basically, one of them is 50% of digital transformations fizzle out. Another one is that 70% are basically just can't get through the resistance, and then 16%, don't see a really big. 16% do see a change, but the other 84% don't see the advantages of that. Now, I think a part of this that we need to start thinking about is the ROI itself, the digital return on investment. Is it in reduction labor costs, material costs, or more importantly, opportunity costs, right? Are we actually taking advantage of the opportunities that come with a transformation? Transformations are difficult, though. Well, we'll talk about this in a second, but they take effort to kick off, and they're a big investment. This particular report, another Gartner report, this one talks about digital transformations, and it's from the public sector. But again, we can net out this to other sectors as well. And it talks about the top challenges for government CIOs. So a transformation in my world, or the way I interpret it, is it's a process for changing people, process, and technology. So it's all three elements. Now, if you look at the top challenges here, the first one is silo strategies, decision making. It's basically saying that there's the siloed nature of an organization, the way resources are distributed and owned, is a challenge. Organization culture is also a problem, because organization culture can be risk averse to lots of change. Budgets, definitely, and this keeps going back to the CapEx OpEx issue, which I opened up, and I'm going to dive into that in a few minutes because it's so important to this overall picture. Is a key factor behind transformations, whether there is enough of a budget to keep to kick it off and then to sustain it, and are we seeing the right ROIs? And then number four, insufficient skills and gaps. And then number five is the one that gets overlooked a lot, which is the procurement approaches, the reliance on existing procurement approaches. And there is definitely an area which probably needs to be looked at very closely because of the complexities of today's world. Collaboration is needed, and a lot of the procurement approaches that we have aren't set up for that kind of environment. So let's go back to transformation. So a transformation, basically, as I said, is people, process, technology. But really, what is it? It's a transition from a current state to a future state. And it consists, this is where project management fits into a transformation. So it consists of a program and projects. So you may have several programs in a transformation, and you may have lots of different projects within that. So that's the bigger picture. Transformations usually run for, well, minimum, I'd say 1 year to probably 5 years. And they are bringing about change in an organization. They're transitioning from one state to another. Now, the important thing about transformations is that they are one-off opportunities for stakeholders to do things, and that's what's so important. Transformations are also driven by three factors: compulsory, so you may have to do something that's mandatory; necessary, because it's a showstopper, so you may have some technology that time has run out on, and if you don't fix it, it's going to basically be a problem. Or it could be related to a strategic factor, which is where you're making investments. Transformations, as I say, go beyond projects. They all need ideation and innovation. Now, this is a big problem if the culture of an organization has operationalized projects, because it doesn't give it the time and space. And then finally, transformations create fundamental change, and with that, opportunities. So transformations are things we can't ignore, and they are things that we need to embrace. But as I said, they are difficult, and a lot of organizations, when they approach them, they don't see all the challenges and adequately prepared for the challenges. So let's go to probably what I think is one of the biggest challenges is, and this is a barrier to project success, is the existing environment. A lot of us in the project management world, we don't really pay a lot of attention to some of the aspects that I'm going to be talking about here, but they are incredibly important because they can very much slow down transformations or projects. So the first thing that you notice there is that you've basically got, you know, your traditional organizational diagram that's got the BUs. Transformations have to cross BUs. They have to basically work across these. So there's lots of different stakeholders, which is a challenge in itself. But another challenge is that a lot of the BUs will have their own projects and they may have their own assets, and these can be locked away within these silos. So this is another challenge, is actually getting to those projects, to those assets themselves. So that's from an organizational perspective. From an environmental perspective, what we have seen is over the last number of decades is just an accumulation of technology, and a lot of that technology is still sitting in there. So what we have is we still have many applications that are dependent on platforms, are hardwired, connected to each other. We have hundreds of processes. Many organizations can have anything between 500 to 1,000 applications. And what we see with that is this huge accumulation of technical debt where problems are basically not dealt with immediately, they're just sort of left. And this is why the budgets of most organizations, as we saw, operational expenditure is so high, because it's going on supporting these incredibly expensive and operationally focused environments that aren't really moving forward. And that's why you know, up there it says complex and relatively static. There's relatively little change, and the complexity of this is absolutely huge. So this becomes a major ball and chain or a barrier to project success going forward. So the landscape, as we said, OPEX dominates CAPEX, and we've got this ball and chain that sits in the actual environment itself. So most projects that are actually initiated in organizations are for operations. They're for keeping the lights on, and they're for fixes, right? So it's all about short-term horizons, incremental improvements. They don't have a lot of visibility from the senior management, and they're not actually doing a lot with reducing the technical debt. The technical debt is still mounting. CapEx projects, which typically you would see for a transformation, you know, much smaller budget, they are trying to deliver something new, strategic factors. They do get the visibility, but here's the problem. The problem is that they're wholly dependent on that operational environment. And if that operational environment, you know, very typically it can be disparate because it's owned by the silos. It's very much metrics driven because it's all about operations. But also the other things about it is that it could be unarchitected. The architects haven't gone into that environment and tried to bring some structure to the chaos itself. And they're inhibited by technical debt and complexity of operations as well. The other aspect I want to touch on was, Gartner talked about this a little bit earlier, was about the procurement approaches. So most organizations have got a procurement arm. The challenge with that is procurement is absolutely critical to transformations, because you need to be able to collaborate with vendors that could be bringing effective solutions that could actually drive some of that change. And typically, procurement, you know, requires a large team to administer. You may be pushing out a lot of requirements to these teams, but the actual process itself is lengthy. It can be very lengthy. It can be up to, say, 27 weeks in this particular sample. And there's very little time that's left for research of solutions that are out there and collaboration for actually trying to find the right solution. So again, procurement can be, you know, a large barrier to project success, because you really want to be able to select your vendors, put them into this 2x2 where you have your strategic vendors providing products and services for your transformation, and then being able to collaborate with them. And as I said, the procurement approaches in a lot of organizations, because they go through a procurement department, aren't really set up to enhance this. So going forward, the main problems in initiating a transformation in an organization is it is difficult to do because it's a massive change, and trying to get things off the ground, with a limited budget, as I said, with the CapEx, the environment, the as-is environment could be very poorly documented. In most cases, there have been attempts to architect it, but it's still could be a big challenge. The transformations themselves are multidisciplinary, they're lengthy, they're complex, and you have to keep your stakeholders engaged. And this is all about providing enough value. So how can you get that value to these stakeholders, and continue to give that value? And this is where this whole outcomes-based approach and vendor business realization management is so important. And then finally, procurement, we just talked about that, finding the right solutions, efficiently engaging and collaborating with vendors, and then leveraging those assets, the assets from other projects, resources that are scattered across the enterprise that could be useful to a particular transformation. So these are the main problems. Okay, so let's look now at our ability to deliver projects. And we talked about this a little bit earlier about our operational view. Now, again, a little bit lighthearted, but our contemporary world is grounded in a legacy from the 19th century, which is related to the production line. So, Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times that came out in the 1930s is a very good sort of reflection of this whole production environment. But what it's done is this whole approach has manifested itself into our business world. And it started at the beginning of the 20th century through the first business schools. You see there, Henry Ford and Frederick Taylor. So Taylor was the time and motion guy for Ford and helped him set up all his factories. They became advocates for this whole time and motion approach, and taught it within the business schools. And as a result, operations management became the key discipline of the time. Everything was about, looking how you produce something and then trying to squeeze the time elements out. And that, I would say, that's probably one of the major forces in business throughout the 20th century, and it still exists with us today. You can see it. Kevin was pointing out to the original PMBOK, 1984. It's all based around processes. It was about 10 different process areas, so you can see this philosophy behind it. And if we actually take a step back and say, well, what is a project? We're really blind men, sort of in the dark, trying to figure it out. So you've got this the parable of the elephant and the blind men, and they all have different views of what the project actually is. Is it one's looking at the trunk and he thinks it's a snake, another one's looking at the tusks and thinks it's a spear. So the point is what is a project? And we have got an extremely process-centric view of the world that came out of this whole operations view in the early part of the 20th century. And as a result, this is the problem now fundamentally that we are left dealing with, is that most organizations have operationalized the project management because it seems the normal thing to do. So a lot of organizations have struggled with project management, where to fit it into the enterprise. And because they have operations already running, they put it under that. So what happens is if you start to operationalize project management, your overriding priority is on delivery in time, maybe budget. It's the triple constraints. Why? Well, because operations are understood by most organizations. They're really the backbone of the way most organizations are run. They basically deliver services, but they do it in this operational production line fashion. And as a result, they're easy to control. So if you take projects, and projects can be unreliable because projects are about people, why not run them like an operation? So what happens is projects are then transformed into tasks. And what that does is it basically takes out any ambiguities because you're dealing with known elements. So you're taking away anything to do with exploratory reflexive functions. Now you might think, well, what's the big deal? Well, it is a big deal because that is a fundamental characteristic of project management. I'll go into that in a few minutes. But the other side to it is that you're not allowing for any possible mistakes. So what effectively you're doing is you're taking a square peg and you're fitting it into a round hole. You're operationalizing something. Now let me show you why I'm going to get to why this is such a problem, because operationalized projects that follow this production line mentality are good at implementing things, but that's it. That there is very little left that you can do. So, for example, if you have to explore something, there's no room for it. There's no room for innovation. We talk about, well, let's introduce innovation into a project, but a project manager is going to turn around and say, no, I'm not going to put that in because that's dealing with something that could take the project off course, and I'm not going to deliver it on time, right? Or I don't have the budget for it. So the resistance to any kind of changes are going to be very high. In a transformation, operationalized projects do not have the flexibility to accommodate unexpected changes. And the bigger thing, and this is where it really is important for stakeholders, is that you have opportunities that get identified within a project. They get either missed or ignored because they don't fit in with the particular schedule, right? So selected projects for a transformation, you need for a transformation the ability to be able to take on different opportunities. This is the funnel, and be able to take different ideas and be able to work with those in terms of working what the best benefits and realization would be for a set of stakeholders. So let's explore this a little bit more. If we take operations on the left and projects on the right, and we look at what operations are. So operations are permanent organizations. They look back in time in terms of looking at what have you delivered, how can we improve it. They're about steady state operational routines. Let's look at what a project is in these characteristics. Well, a project is a temporary organization, right? And it leans forward in time. You're trying to do something new in terms of delivering something for the organization. They're not steady state. They're non-equilibrium, and they don't follow or shouldn't follow operationalized routines, because what you're doing is you're dealing with stakeholders, you're dealing with ideas. You should be able to take feedback from all sorts of places. It's not about keeping the lights on, it's about discovery, and it's about illumination. And it's not about measuring to improve. It's far more orientated around what are the stakeholders in the organization trying to do? How can we improve it for the stakeholders? Effectively, projects aren't stable. They shouldn't be stable because they're going into the unknown. This is the whole aspect of project management. It's about dealing with the unknowns. Operations doesn't know how to deal with the unknown. That's why it tries to routinize everything, whereas projects are all about the unknown. And if they are about the unknown, they're about uncertainty. They're soft versus hard, and they are variable. So when you actually take a step back and look at the two, they are polar opposites. And yet we try and run our organizations projects as operations. So this is a very, very important message, because stakeholders clearly need to understand this, that there's a vast difference between the two. And again, that comment earlier, I think, is so important about projects are all about making mistakes. You want to make mistakes in projects, because if you make a mistake in a project, that's great. The project will be over, but at least you know that mistake, and then you can fix it. So when it goes into operations, it doesn't then become a mistake. So it's far easier and less costly going down that path. So projects aren't an extension of operations. They are intention, because they're the polar opposite. So in operations, you usually work inside the organization. Projects go beyond. Processes are exploratory versus routinized. It shouldn't be hierarchical. It should be collaborative. It should be about finding the unknowns. Your rule sets really are about reflexivity, because it's trying to find new ways of doing things. And and it's about one-off problem solving, innovation, and so on. So these are the big differences between the two. And if you start to operationalize your projects, you lose all that. You're basically running an operation, and it takes it away, and that is a big loss for organizations. Now, we've been running projects for 5,000 years, maybe longer. Projects have been around, and before the industrial age, before the 20th century, we did have a lot of projects. And it's interesting because Daniel Defoe, very famous author of Robinson Crusoe, the castaway on the island, he's the original castaway. Defoe wrote a paper about projects. He visualized a projecting age, and this is way before the industrial age. He actually wrote this essay on projects. And if we actually take a look at this essay, he's a visionary because he's talking about projects. Projects deal, this is a book that I wrote, Kevin referred to it a little bit earlier, so I kind of went into this quite a lot. But when I actually looked at the history of our projects, we've had projects since, you know, the Egyptians, the Greeks, you know, Romans, and so on, and we've been running projects since then. Now, what Defoe in his treatise came up with was that projects are basically about delivering something new. It's very obvious that it's outcome based. It's not time based. You know, it doesn't really matter. Time doesn't matter so long as you are delivering something for your stakeholders. And along comes the Industrial Revolution in 1870. Well, it started before that, but anyway, 1870, and it changes the business world. It changes it from an outcomes based to what we call a task based, which is very operationalized. So we have a world that's before that, before the Industrial Revolution, which Defoe defined. Now we're in a world which we call post-industrial. And I'm now going to go into some of the best practices that we have adopted at ProSect and that advocate for this outcomes-based approach. And I'm going to go through that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the techniques we've used and also some of the software that we've been able to apply to these approaches. So what is the right approach to project management? I would argue that the way the PMI is shifting, the way IPMA, Kevin again referred to that, is that we need to be thinking about a outcomes-based approach. The operational approach, which is being applied to projects, is really a relic of the industrial age, and it's not a fit for purpose model for today's world, right? And we saw that with the agile revolution, but that doesn't quite get us completely there. So outcomes based is a big step forward, and transformations, as I said before, are very important to organizations because they're a one-time opportunity to do something, and aligning project management to deliver that. And we see the evolution in PMI. Kevin talked about that, about the roles of the BA and the role of organizational change management, how that's come in and is supporting this outcomes-based view, and also business realization management. Now, the PMO, as I said, is in a very unique position within organizations and can basically have a big influence. And the influence there really is shifting the thinking, especially a lot of stakeholders, you know, they perceive projects to be, well, it's basically a schedule. You go and define a schedule. Well, it's not. You know, projects are people based. They should be revolving around stakeholders. They should be revolving around the outcomes that are visible to a stakeholder. The stakeholders should be able to see the benefits as they are coming out of the project itself, and you know, be able to support it from that perspective. And I'm going to show you examples of that. Also, the other aspect of the PMO, which I think is very important to mention about this right now, is that innovation, as I said, is difficult to drive into projects. In fact, in an operationalized world, it's almost impossible. So again, PMOs could take the lead in trying to drive out innovation, you know, working hand in hand with projects. So basically, working through the project lifecycle from the strategic front end. This is the critical part of it. PMOs should ensure that innovation tries to occur in the cycle. It should help in spotting and identifying opportunities. They should be working closely with setting up the stakeholders and working closely in terms of the formation of innovation strategies. So that's a role I see as a next generation PMO. The PMO should be helping projects in trying to innovate as much as possible. But projects can only innovate if we start taking a outcomes-based approach versus the operational view. So effectively what I'm saying, and Tim pointed this out to me yesterday, that we are really returning to the pre-industrial world of project management, which was very successful for 4,500 years, right? Which is this whole outcomes-based Robinson Crusoe. So I think now you'll probably recognize what I'm talking about when it comes to Charlie Chaplin and Robinson Crusoe. Okay, so PMOs should take advantage of this outcomes approach because it opens up new possibilities. So again, reiterating something I put up earlier about the unique position in an organization, how do you go about doing this? And I would say that the possibilities can really open up by taking an outcomes-based approach. And there are two strategies that I would advocate. The first one is you use the outcomes-based approach to you apply it into your projects. So I'm going to show you an example of this where the outcomes-based project has very much benefits realization built into it. It has organizational change management because organizational change management is needed for if the realization of the benefits is going to come post-project, and also procurement as well, the vendor analysis. It's easier to do the collaborative stuff if you've got everything in a project defined where it's honed towards a certain set of deliverables, right? Because then that helps you focus on what the solutions need to be. Now, the other aspect about strategy number two is really taking the concept of the outcomes-based approach, which is really a chain of artifacts that are pulled together. I'm going to show you that in a second in the slide, and then using that to help shift the spending from OPEX to CAPEX. And the way to do that would be through certain initiatives like application portfolio management, like enterprise architecture, and like enterprise asset management. So these were three major challenges that we talked about. So these are wrapped into strategy number two. So let's start with strategy number one. So number one, basically task-based approach, which is, we talked about this quite a lot already, about the focuses on the schedule, you get lost in the weeds, it's not linked to the deliverables or benefits tightly. Outcomes-based approach, and this is the chain I'm talking about. This is the traceability chain, which goes from vision and strategy in the organization through the business case, and then into the programs themselves, the outcomes and benefits of a program, which are driven by the deliverables and the program and projects. But then you link the business processes and the requirements and the actual solutions to that. So they're all part of this traceability change. And the reason you do this is because the actual stakeholders that are going to be contributing towards the project itself, they don't care about how a deliverable is created. That's a task-based view. What they want to know is, what's the progress against the business case? What's the threat level to the organization against, with an intended benefit? Is it going to get knocked off course? What's the progress against those business goals? And what are the contributors to project status at the deliverable level? So BRM is a key part of this because it ensures the strategic goals of a project are translated into the planned benefits. And then, as we said, OCM continues this. Well, first of all, OCM helps engage the stakeholders early, but it continues that relationship post-project. So if we go and look at this outcomes-based approach in a bit more detail here, you can see here that we've gone from the vision strategy, and this whole approach ensures that deliverables are evaluated on their value rather than just the cost. But the decomposition is critical here, because the decomposition starts to highlight the interrelationships between the different artifacts, and it also starts to address some of the complexities that can come in. Now, as I said earlier before, as a best practice, we've modeled this with some software that we have using Rec Suite, and you can see here that you can using this type of software, it's far easier to see the relationships between that cascade all the way down from the outcomes and benefits through to the program deliverables, right down through to the business processes and requirements. And this is the game changer, is that if you have this relationship that is traceable amongst all these different artifacts, it makes a lot easier to well, first of all, to run the project, because you're decomplexifying it. So in this example, this is taken from this example actually is taken from the First Nations. It was basically opening up 6 justice centers in BC, and we basically modeled it in such a way that the program deliverables are all about opening up the centers, looking at the pilot to see the results, and then applying that knowledge and so on and so on. In this particular example, this is another example of the same concept. It's basically a program, well, it's a transformation that is geared towards net zero, and it basically takes this value and outcomes based approach. So you can see here that the outcomes and benefits are right at the top of the artifact list, and the programs feed into that. So what this does is it allows you to have conversations with your stakeholders on an outcomes based, and because the benefits are closely tied to this, your conversations with stakeholders change, and therefore your relationship with the stakeholders changes as well by taking this outcomes based approach. So this is why it's so important. The other thing that we've done with the software is we've actually attached the stakeholder analysis into the project deliverables. And what that does is it now links the business requirements to stakeholders, and these can then be explored in what we call business impact assessments that we do in organizational change management. And what we can do is we can also then start to get into this discussion, because we've got the project deliverables closely tied to the stakeholders. We can get into discussions on the metrics. Now, the metrics really ought to be coming out the stakeholder world. They are not project metrics. They are metrics within the context of that stakeholder world, and they should be tied to the strategic goals of the project. Now, it's outcomes based, so it becomes very much about what the deliverable of that particular project is. And by tying in what we've done here is we've taken this 2x2 matrix, which shows you which stakeholders to focus on. So the red is the engaged, that's what we want. What we've got here is we've got a Kanban view of where we've linked as you can see, this is our stakeholder analysis. These are all the different stakeholders. We've linked them to the principal deliverables, right? So the stakeholders in Engage are the ones that are really linked to the highly important deliverables. So we can keep an eye on the deliverables and make sure that we're meeting the stakeholders' expectations. Now, what metrics do we use for project management? Well, for reporting, we've had some discussions on this. In a task-based world, it's all about schedules, it's about productivity, it's about change requests, it's about profit and loss and so on. In the bigger picture, for an outcomes-based approach, it's a different view. It's about business outcomes. It's about stakeholder engagement and adoption. It's about the ratio of converting ideas. It's about running pilots and testing out those ideas. It's about prototyping. It's really all about trying to get to an outcome that is high in value and that brings benefits to the organization. So this is the kind of reporting that I would advocate very much with this outcomes based. And again, I think this is something for next generation PMOs to absolutely consider. Now, an outcomes-based approach also simplifies the engagement with vendors, because now you've got your deliverables and requirements closely linked to the stakeholders. You know which ones are important to the project. You can now start to look at the complex scenarios that need simplification, and you can invest in the right technologies and solutions based on changes that you can make in the we're going to get to this in a second about the enterprise architecture, but in this particular view here, what we've done is we've linked the requirements to a vendor analysis. And as you can see here, the vendor analysis is driven by the response of vendors to sets of requirements that we send out, we collaborate with them. And what this Kanban view does is it enhances our decision making by comparing these vendor responses. So it makes it a lot easier to select a vendor for a pilot, because we have now the key requirements for a particular deliverable set, because we're using this outcomes-based approach. Okay, strategy number 2 is basically how can we start to shift this spending from OPEX to CAPEX. So it's all about trying to better leverage assets. It's about trying to initiate transformations. And we have to deal with that technical debt and the ballooning infrastructure costs. We have to try and reduce the costs of day-to-day operations and the other aspects like slow procurement and so on. So how do we, well, what's the goal here? The goal is really to switch these numbers around. It's really to move from, instead of 30% is on CapEx to 70%, change these ratios around. That should be a long-term goal. And again, a PMO is fundamental in driving these kind of changes, because it removes that ball and chain or starts to reduce it. How do we do that? Well, first of all, what things can we focus on? Well, we can focus on applications. So things like application portfolio management, again, by using this whole outcomes-based approach, right, where you've linked your principal artifacts using this particular chain, you can start to look at the environment from that perspective. So we had the principal business processes at the top with the requirements, and then we had the application modules. That could be used in scenarios of application portfolio management where you're looking for duplicity. Now, once you start to release some funding, you can then put that into transformations that can be used for re-engineering processes. The other thing that I would advocate would be to start to instill things like enterprise architecture and governance to start to control the chaos, and then make some effective changes to the business and technical sides as well. So 2 sub-initiatives, which are application portfolio management and enterprise architecture. And the outcomes-based approach can help in this because it can be used for mapping the as-is and then looking at those, looking at the applications. So remember that applications were planned, created, and delivered by projects in the past. So if you've got any kind of documentation, which you probably don't, but you might do, that would help in terms of helping go forward on this. So again, applications portfolio management, the key thing there is tying those application modules back to the principal business requirements and processes, and then exploring the value to the organization for things like the total cost of ownership. So again, this view here gives us a view where these are the key applications that we want, and these are the ones that we want to eliminate because there's duplicity. And we've been able to make that discovery using this outcomes-based approach. Again, you can use the outcomes-based approach also in enterprise architecture in terms of, again, this is critical in bringing bringing some discipline and an organization to a chaotic environment and reducing the overall technical debt. So effectively here, we're creating maps of as-is. We're going through all these actions here. Now, remember that when you kick off a project, the teams have to go into a project with the goal of defining the differences between the current and the future current and future state. They have to create target architectures. They have to map non-functional requirements. So your teams are dealing with this environment anyway, and they have to manage that technical debt. So this is all in the interest of removing barriers. And then the other aspect to this outcomes-based approach is it does simplify managing standards. So effectively, once you have your outcomes and benefits, you can start thinking about linkages to industry standards, business charters. And we've been able to do this through this Rex Suite software. We've been able to actually tie all these different standards in So if there's a change in standards, they can be notified back to the program deliverable, the project deliverable, and the owners of this, that a standard has changed and they need to take actions. PMOs are in a unique position to enforce standards in organizations. And like I said, much of this can be automated using this type of software. And then finally, asset management. So again, assets can be identified across the enterprise, and then using this kind of system, they can be better allocated to particular projects as well. So again, this is a bit of a discovery, but again, why not use the software to identify assets? Okay, so that takes me to the conclusion. So in summary, I won't cover this. I've already talked about this. Unique position. These are the strategies. You cannot do this if you have an operational PM culture. It's going to restrict you from the way you approach things. And I think I've highlighted that before. This approach is going to appeal to stakeholders. They should take advantage of the opportunity. So to round off everything what I've just said, we looked at the reports from Gartner. We gathered that CapEx and OpEx are the wrong way around. Our current environments are balls and chains in stopping us from moving forward effectively with projects. We talked about transformations, about their dependency on project management. We talked about how projects have become so operationalized, they have removed the effectiveness of projects within organizations. We've basically put a square peg into a round hole. Yes, there is a way forward. We look back in time to what Crusoe was talking about, which is this whole outcomes-based approach. And there you see it, the outcomes-based approach, which is all about focusing on benefits to the stakeholder. And then the strategies that I've described, two different strategies that allow you to get there. Okay. I have probably overrun my time.
Just by 2 minutes, not a big issue. Okay, we're now going to take a quick break. Was going to be a 5-minute break. Now it's a 3-minute break. So if everybody wants to take a quick bio break, and we will resume with the next session at 3:20. So that's you've got a 3-minute break. We'll resume at 3:20 with Tim Lalonde, talking about an organizational culture and its impact on the structure or style of your PMO. Thank you very much, everybody.